You were the strong one, the one who kept it all together no matter what was falling apart around you. People leaned on you, admired your composure, relied on your calm. But what they never saw, what you never said, is how heavy it became. How every time you swallowed your emotions to keep the peace, it chipped away at your own. You held everything in, thinking strength meant staying quiet, until it didn't. Until the weight of holding it all together started breaking you from the inside out. And no one noticed. Not because they didn't care, but because you never let them see. Because you thought breaking down would mean letting them down. But deep down, you knew something had to give. And this time, it was you. You felt responsible for staying strong, even when you were falling apart inside. You carried the weight of being the strong one like it was your job to hold everything together even when no one asked you to. You told yourself to keep it together, to stay composed, to be the one others could lean on. But inside, you were barely hanging on. You felt like if you let your guard down for even a second, everything would fall apart, and everyone around you would fall with it. As an INFJ, your empathy makes you feel responsible for keeping peace, for being reliable, for being the calm in the storm. But what no one saw was how much you were sacrificing just to appear okay. You were breaking quietly behind the mask of strength because you thought falling apart would disappoint the people who depended on you. You didn't choose to suffer alone. You just didn't know if anyone could handle your truth the way you've always handled theirs. You suppressed your emotions to avoid being seen as a burden. You learned early on that expressing your emotions often made others uncomfortable, so you started bottling them up, not because you didn't feel deeply, but because you were afraid of being labeled too sensitive, too dramatic, or simply too much. As an INFJ, your emotional world runs deep, but you've trained yourself to protect it by staying quiet, by smiling when you want to cry, by pretending you're fine when you're unraveling inside. You didn't suppress your feelings out of weakness, you did it out of survival. You didn't want to weigh others down with your sadness or your fears. You were always the one others came to for comfort, for stability. So where could you go? You convinced yourself that your emotions were a burden, something to carry alone in silence. But over time, that silence became suffocating because even the strongest need to be held sometimes. And your feelings, they were never too much. They were just waiting for a space safe enough to be seen. You showed up for everyone else, but no one noticed you were silently drowning. You were the steady one, the person everyone leaned on. You listened, supported, encouraged, and held space for the pain of others like it was second nature. But while you were showing up for everyone else, no one thought to ask how you were really doing. They didn't see the exhaustion in your eyes or the way your smile started to fade. You were always the strong one. So they assumed you didn't need help. But inside, you were slowly unraveling, drowning in the weight of being everything for everyone and nothing for yourself. You kept saying, "I'm fine," because the truth felt too heavy to share, and part of you didn't think anyone would really understand. As an INFJ, you've mastered the art of hiding your pain behind calm and compassion. But that doesn't mean you weren't hurting. You just got used to surviving quietly, and that silence nearly broke you. You believed that breaking down meant failure, so you kept pretending you were okay. You equated strength with composure, so every time you felt yourself slipping, you forced yourself to hold it together. You smiled when you wanted to cry, you joked when your chest was tight with anxiety, you helped others even when you were barely functioning yourself. As an INFJ, your inner world is complex and deeply emotional, but you've been conditioned to believe that breaking down is weakness, that letting go means you've failed. So you kept pretending. You convinced yourself that if you just pushed a little harder, held on a little longer, everything would eventually feel okay. But the truth is, pretending to be okay doesn't make the pain disappear. It just hides it long enough for it to grow deeper. And by the time you realized you were running on empty, you were already burning out from the inside. Holding it in didn't make you stronger. It just made you suffer in silence. You held your pain in so tightly that it started showing up as anxiety, fatigue, and numbness. You thought you were doing the right thing by keeping it all in, by staying quiet, staying strong, staying composed. But the pain you buried didn't stay buried. It found other ways to surface. You started waking up tired, even after a full night's sleep. Your chest felt tight for no reason. The smallest things overwhelmed you. You weren't just emotionally exhausted, you were mentally and physically worn down. That numbness, it wasn't peace. It was your body's way of coping when it couldn't carry anymore. As an INFJ, you internalize everything, every hurt, every worry, every responsibility. But when that emotional pressure builds with no release, it turns inward. Your silence becomes anxiety, your patience becomes fatigue, and your kindness starts to feel like a trap. You didn't break down because you were weak. You broke down because your pain had nowhere else to go. You ignored your own needs because you were too busy meeting everyone else's. You kept putting yourself last, not because you didn't matter to yourself, but because everyone else always seemed to need you more. You were the helper, the fixer, the quiet support in the background while others leaned on your strength. As an INFJ, it's in your nature to tune into the emotional needs of those around you, but somewhere along the way, you lost sight of your own. You told yourself you were fine. You minimized your exhaustion, your stress, your loneliness. You gave and gave until giving became a habit you couldn't break, even when you were running on nothing. The people around you grew used to your strength, never realizing it came at a cost. And by the time you paused to check in with yourself, the silence inside was deafening. Ignoring your needs didn't make you selfless, it made you invisible. And now you're learning that caring for others should never mean abandoning yourself. You smiled to avoid questions, but your silence screamed when you were alone. You became an expert at smiling when you needed to. You knew how to make people feel comfortable around you, even when you were falling apart inside. You gave the world the version of you they expected, the strong one, the composed one, the one who has it all together. But the truth was, that smile was a mask, and behind it lived the weight of everything you couldn't say. When you were alone, the silence hit differently. That's when the overthinking started. That's when the emotions you'd stuffed down all day came flooding back. You didn't cry for attention. You didn't fall apart publicly. You just sat with the ache quietly, night after night. As an INFJ, you felt too deeply to let it show, and too responsible to let it slip. Smiling was your shield. Silence was your scream. And the saddest part, most people never even noticed the difference. You didn't know how to ask for help, so you suffered quietly. You didn't grow up learning how to ask for help. You learned how to manage pain alone. Somewhere along the way, you convinced yourself that needing support made you weak, or worse, a burden. So instead of reaching out, you swallowed the pain. You became the strong one, the dependable one, the one who figured it out on your own, even when it was tearing you apart inside. It wasn't that you didn't want help, it's that you didn't know how to let yourself receive it. The words always got stuck in your throat. The fear of being misunderstood, dismissed, or seen as too much kept you quiet. And so you suffered in silence, hoping someone would just notice without you having to say a word. But they didn't. And the more you kept it all in, the more it chipped away at you, not because you were weak, but because no one was ever meant to carry that much alone. You reached a breaking point, not from weakness, but from carrying too much alone. You didn't fall apart because you were fragile. You broke because you were strong for too long. You held everything together in silence, making sure no one saw the cracks forming beneath your surface. You carried the weight of others' expectations, emotions, and needs, all while burying your own. And you told yourself, I can handle this, even when your mind was screaming for rest. But the truth is, no one can carry that kind of burden forever. It catches up with you, in your body, in your mind, in the way your spirit slowly dims. And when you finally reached your breaking point, it wasn't because you gave up, it was because your soul had been whispering for help and no one was listening, including you. That collapse, it wasn't failure. It was the moment your heart demanded to be heard, because even the strongest people have limits, and yours mattered too. You've learned that real strength isn't holding it in, it's learning to let go before it breaks you. You used to think that staying silent made you strong, that if you just held it in a little longer, pushed a little harder, everything would eventually get better. But over time, you started to realize that silence doesn't heal, it hides. And hiding your pain doesn't make it go away, it just buries it deeper until it becomes too heavy to carry. You've learned, often the hard way, that real strength isn't pretending you're fine. It's recognizing when something is hurting you and having the courage to let go before it destroys you from the inside. Letting go doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're brave enough to honor your limits, strong enough to say, this is hurting me, and wise enough to walk away from what no longer serves you. That shift, choosing self-care over silent suffering, that's where your real power lives. If you've ever felt like you had to hold everything together while quietly falling apart, know this. You're not weak for needing rest, for needing space, for needing to be seen. You don't have to carry it all alone. If this spoke to you, stick around. There's more here for people like you. Quiet fighters, deep feelers, and those finally learning to let go. Subscribe if you haven't already, and come back when your heart needs a place to breathe.